So congratulations on finishing your first milestone. By now you should have a working prototype of a login app. It should have some sort of logic. Hopefully it looks a little bit better than what I've created here in this screenshot. But it's important to reflect back on the app design cycle. Often we develop things or projects in education and we don't get a chance to revisit them or reiterate over them. So this is your chance to reflect on your design and think about what new features you might want to develop, what features you might want to explore and research to implement into your app. So you can change it from something which is functional into something which users will actually want to download. So a process that I go through with my students to generate ideas is the S.C.A.M.P.E.R process. And the idea of this is basically to make connections and see relationships between what you've created and what could be possible in terms of the design or functionality. So we'll go through each of these stages and we'll go through the prompt questions and decide which features we may want to include, which we may not, but also we'll garner some feedback from our peers as well as we start to test out and develop our app further. So I like to try and visually display this. On the left, I have my app that I've created. On the right, I have a screenshot of the app that I will inspire me, or the app that will draw some features from. So this could be, for example, Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or something you use, anything that has any sort of authentication in this case. So then we can start to look at what functionality could be used instead. So at its base level, we have a login app, so we need to authenticate users in some sort of way. So currently we just have some logic which looks at the text box and the password, and we say, does the username equal the username? Does it equal the password, and authenticate? But as we know, there's plenty of other ways that we could authenticate. We could use biometric authentication, so we could use fingerprints, we could use Face ID, we could look at Web 2 authentication, so we could authenticate using our Apple IDs or our Google accounts or our Facebook accounts. And something which is new is now Web 3 authentication, so we could authenticate with our crypto wallet, for example, MetaMask, and we could use this to authenticate. So there's many different ways we could authenticate and rethink our base level functionality, really substitute it. And next we're going to look at what functionality could we combine. So for example, on my app on the right, I can hide and reveal my input based on what the user selects. So for example, the password, if I want to have that secured or not, I can toggle the little I. So perhaps that's something I'd like to include. The other thing we could do is having the login and the existing password be on the same form. So we could combine those two into one form. So basically, if a user doesn't authenticate, it can prompt them and say, it looks like you're not a user, or this email doesn't exist. Perhaps you'd like to create a new account. So we can sort of build that into one form rather than having the two separate forms. After we've combined some of the features, we can look what could be adapted, what features could be adjusted within our app. So for example, we could look at the cookies to remember if the user is logged in. So we don't want to authenticate a user every time they launch the app, so we could have some sort of cookies to remember or some sort of data point which we can check on. We could also have Face ID on load. So as soon as you boot up the app, it could authenticate the user based on their ID. That could make a little bit more of a smoother transition. But last of all, does our interface actually meet our needs? The design brief for this project was to create a doggy dating app. Does your interface meet the needs of what we're trying to achieve? So that's something we need to consider as well when we're building new features. Don't just think about the technical, also think about the design. As you start to go through these, you might see a bit of an overlap with some of the prompt questions, but that's fine. The idea is just to generate some ideas. So before we're talking about the interface, does it meet its purpose? We could also look at how we modify the color, the shape, and the form. So for example, we could look at the logo. For example, does it suit the purpose of a doggy dating app? Does the color theme work? Are we using colors which are appropriate for our purpose? Is there any way we could improve the use of our space to ensure that it looks full, but we also use the proximity in our design principles to ensure that each of the elements actually meets our requirements? As we know, when we're building any app, we always need to consider creating reusable code which can be used for other purposes. So it's a good time to reflect on what could we use this functionality for. So we've got some logic in there to hide and show elements. We've got the authentication, which can be used across a broad range. So ensuring that when we develop our app, that we use correct abstraction to ensure that methods are separated or interface elements are separated so we could reuse them. So this may involve refactoring or recoding a lot of the elements to ensure that we could use this code for a different purpose and build up our knowledge base. Hopefully you're all familiar with the old adage that less is more. So at this point, we need to think about what could be removed, what doesn't really fit our purpose. So in our current login app, I was showing you different functionality of how you can use navigation links. So perhaps we need to remove those additional buttons. We can think about, for example, that robot head I've got on the right-hand side. Maybe that needs to be removed. Thinking about what fits our purpose, ensuring that we have an app which loads quickly, meets its purpose, and gives a good user experience. Finally, we're going to look at reverse. So how could the design pattern, the layout, or the order be changed? So thinking about our app, currently the first screen that the user sees is a login screen. Is this necessary? If this is an app, for example, for a hotel, perhaps you want to have information about the hotel before they log in. Authentication shouldn't always be the first experience that the user has when they open up your app. So thinking about the flow of your app, what information is most relevant to the user when they first download the app? What do they want to see? What do they want to know? Does everything need to be secured, or can some information be available without authentication? So now that we've gone through our S.C.A.M.P.E.R process, we have a list of features that we may want to include. So if I've got biometric authentication, switching forms to existing users, hiding and showing the password, and adding a forget password feature. So remember, even if you gain feedback from users, even if you gain feedback from other inspiration, you don't always need to take on that feedback. You need to go through and realize what's important, and also what are the features that you want to implement within the time frame that you have for the next release. So generally with app development, we now work with agile project management. So we want to ensure what features will be in the next sprint, in the next release, work on those, prioritize those, and ensure that they have the most impact for the user when we're developing them. So the main thing I want you to take away from this process is we're trying to develop new features. We want you to reflect on the app and what you've created, and decide on what features you could implement to improve for the next sprint. So far we have a list of features. Next we need to flesh them out a little bit. So a great idea is to create a job card looking at what's the categorization of the job, who's going to be performing it. Is it an interface change? Is it a programming change? Is it something that the user needs to look at? Describing the job in a little bit more detail, assigning who's going to actually take on the job, perhaps add an image or some sort of inspiration for the job. And lastly, how much time do you estimate that this job will take? Is it going to be able to fit within your next sprint? So lastly, I'm going to introduce you to a project management methodology called Kanban. Kanban was originally developed in the automotive industry in Japan, and basically it's an agile way to manage and improve work across human systems. So for example, we're going to create a job, we're going to figure out who's going to be doing that job, and then we can validate that. So in its simplicity, we have three columns. We have the icebox, which is where we have our jobs sitting, we've assigned them to someone, but nobody's currently working on them. As we start to work on the job, we move that into work in progress. This means the job has been assigned and someone is actually actively working on it. Once the developer or the designer has finished with that job, they'll then move it into the validating, where the testing team will take over and will make sure that what you've created fits the purpose. Otherwise, we'll go back to the whole process again and work through our design process. So this is the Kanban process. It's fairly simple, but it gives you a good way to figure out what features you want to implement and then when they're actually being worked on and finished. There are a lot of Kanban tools available, some more professional than others. If you're just starting out, or if you're completing this as a part of my course, I'd recommend looking at tools like Padlet, which have the flexibility to create as many columns as you like, and you can assign jobs and add more detail to those projects. Another one which is a bit more robust and a bit more aligned with Kanban is Trello. Trello works really well with your Google accounts. You can set up your teams. You can assign jobs to different people. So Trello is a little more focused towards development or project management. As you move into industry, you'll start to look at tools by Atlassian, like Jira and things like that as well. A lot of these tools, like Trello, also integrate into Slack and Discord and all those sort of discussion points as well. So I'd advise you to start exploring Trello, look at creating an account, creating boards, and starting to manage your project this way in order to keep track of the things that you need to develop over time. In the next few steps for this series, I'm not going to be showing you the continuation of the project. I'm just going to be showing you individual features which you could choose to implement into your existing project. So I'll be showing you some more technical features like we've seen, like hiding and showing the password. Perhaps you want to implement Firebase. Different things like that, but I won't show you the complete project. So it'll be up to you a little bit to research and implement this into your own project. It won't be so much of a step by step to show you how to create each of the features.